The Palestinian right of return is the political position or principle that Palestinian refugees, both first-generation refugees and their descendants, have a right to return, and a right to the property they themselves or their forebears left behind or were forced to leave in what is now Israel and the Palestinian territories. As part of the 1948 Palestinian Exodus, a result of the 1948 Palestine War and due to the 1967 Six-Day War, proponents of the right of return hold that it is a sacred right, as well as an inalienable and basic human right, whose applicability both generally and specifically to the Palestinians is protected under international law. This view holds that those who opt not to return or for whom return is not feasible, should receive compensation in lieu. Opponents of the right of return hold that there is no basis for it in international law, and that it is an unrealistic demand. The government of Israel regards the claim as a Palestinian ambit claim, and does not view the admission of Palestinian refugees to their former homes in Israel as a right, but rather as a political claim to be resolved as part of a final peace settlement. Other disputed aspects include the issue of the territorial unit to which Palestinian self-determination would attach, the context by which the right is being advanced, and the universality of the principles advocated or established to other refugee situations. Background. Overview. The number of Palestinian refugees of the 1948 war is estimated at between 700,000 and 800,000, and another 280,000 to 350,000 people were refugees of the 1967 war. Approximately 120,000–170,000 among the 1967 refugees are believed to have also been refugees from the 1948 war, fleeing the second time. Today, the estimated number of Palestinian refugees, including both first-generation refugees and their descendants, exceeds 4 million. The issue of the right of return has been of great importance to Palestinians since 1948, when the refugee problem was created. In June 1948, the Israeli government stated its position, which was reiterated in a letter to the United Nations on 2 August 1949, that in its view a solution to the Palestinian refugee problem must be sought, not through the return of the refugees to Israel, but through the resettlement of the Palestinian Arab refugee population in other states. The first formal move towards the recognition of a right of return was in UN General Assembly Resolution 194 passed on the 11th of December 1948, which resolves that the refugees wishing to return to their homes and live at peace with their neighbors should be permitted to do so at the earliest practicable date, and that compensation should be paid for the property of those choosing not to return and for loss of or damage to property which, under principles of international law or inequity, should be made good by the governments or authorities responsible. UN General Assembly Resolution 3236, passed on the 22nd of November 1974, declared the right of return to be an inalienable right. However, General Assembly resolutions are not binding in international law, and the Oslo agreements deliberately omit any mention of these resolutions. The right of return was defined as the foremost of Palestinian rights at the 12th Palestine National Council meeting in 1974, when it became the first component of the Palestine Liberation Organization's trinity of inalienable rights, the others being the right of self-determination and the right to an independent state. 1948 Palestinian Exodus. The Palestinian refugee problem started during the 1948 Palestine War, when between 700,000 and 750,000 Arabs fled, or were expelled from their homes in the area that would become Israel. They settled in refugee camps in Transjordan, Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, and other parts of Palestine allotted to the Arab state in the UN partition resolution that were occupied by Transjordan and Egypt during the war. From December 1947 to March 1948, around 100,000 Palestinians left. Among them were many from the higher and middle classes from the cities, who left voluntarily, expecting to return when the situation had calmed down. From April to July, between 250,000 and 300,000 fled in front of Haganah offensives, mainly from the towns of Haifa, Tiberias, Beit Shean, Safed, Jaffa and Acre, that lost more than 90% of their Arab inhabitants. Some expulsions arose, particularly along the Tel Aviv-Jerusalem road and in eastern Galilee. After the truce in June, about 100,000 Palestinians became refugees. About 50,000 inhabitants of Lydda and Ramla were expelled towards Ramallah by Israeli forces during Operation Dani, and most others during clearing operations performed by the IDF on its rear areas. During Operation Dekel, the Arabs of Nazareth and South Galilee could remain in their homes. They later formed the core of the Arab Israelis. From October to November 1948, the IDF launched Operation Yoav to chase Egyptian forces from the Negev and Operation Hiram to chase the Arab Liberation Army from North Galilee. This generated an exodus of 200,000 to 220,000 Palestinians. Here, Arabs fled fearing atrocities or were expelled if they had not fled. During Operation Hiram, at least 9 massacres of Arabs were performed by IDF soldiers. After the war, from 1948 to 1950, the IDF cleared its borders, which resulted in the expulsion of around 30,000 to 40,000 Arabs. The UN estimated the number of refugees outside Israel at 711,000. No Arab country except Jordan has to date assimilated a significant population of Palestinian refugees, nor given them full citizenship, and many rely on economic aid from the UN or persons in other countries. It is the position of most Arab governments not to grant citizenship to the descendants of Palestinian refugees born within their borders. Even though many have no other home, this policy is in part due to the wishes of these Arab states for Palestinians to be allowed to return to their homes within Israel, in part due to these states wishing to relieve themselves of the refugees. Causes and responsibilities. The causes and responsibilities of the Exodus are a matter of controversy among historians and commentators of the conflict. Although historians now agree on most of the events of that period, there is still disagreement on whether the Exodus was due to a plan designed before or during the war by Zionist leaders, or whether it was an unintended result of the war. Absentees property. During the Palestinian Exodus, Israeli leaders decided against the return of the refugees. During her visit at Haifa on May 1, 1948, Golda Meir declared, "The Jews should treat the remaining Arabs with civil and human equality. But it is not our job to worry about the return of those who have fled." A group consisting of local authorities, the kibbutz movements, the settlement departments of the national institutions, Haganah commanders and influential figures such as Yosef Weitz and Ezra Danan started lobbying against repatriation. A transfer committee and a policy of fait accompli were set up to prevent a refugee return. In July, it had become an official policy. Absentees' property was managed by Israeli government and numerous Palestinian villages were leveled. A parallel has been drawn by some commentators between the state and private restitutions made from Germany to Israel over Holocaust thefts and the compensation due to Palestinians evicted in the formation of Israel. Others have compared Palestinians' claims for compensation to the claims of ethnic Germans who were expelled from Eastern Europe in the aftermath of the Holocaust and World War II. In 1945, of 26.4 million dunams of land in Mandate Palestine, 12.8 million was owned by Arabs, 1.5 million by Jews, 1.5 million was public land and 10.6 million constituted the desertic Beersheba district. By 1949, Israel controlled 20.5 million dunams or 78% of lands in what had been Mandate Palestine. 8% were privately controlled by Jews, 6% by Arabs, with the remaining 86% was public land. 1967 Palestinian Exodus. During the Six-Day War, another Palestinian exodus occurred. An estimated 280,000 to 350,000 Palestinians fled or were expelled from the West Bank, the Gaza Strip and the Golan Heights as a result of the Six-Day War. Approximately 120,000–170,000 among them were believed to also be refugees from the First War, fleeing a second time. Relationship to Jewish exodus from Arab countries. A comparison is often made between the situation of Palestinian refugees and the exodus of Jews from Arab countries who are now in Israel. It is estimated that 800,000 to 1 million Jews were either forced from their homes or left the Arab countries from 1948 until the early 1970s. 260,000 reached Israel between 1948 and 1951, and 600,000 by 1972. In 2000, Bobby Brown, advisor to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on diaspora affairs and delegates from the World Jewish Congress and the Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations, began an intensive campaign to secure official political and legal recognition of Jews from Arab lands as refugees. The campaign's proponents hoped their efforts would prevent acceptance of the right of return to Palestinians, and reduce the amount of compensation that would be paid by Israel for appropriated Palestinian property. Then President of the U.S. Bill Clinton gave an interview in July 2000 to Israel's Channel 1 and disclosed an agreement to recognize Jews from Arab lands as refugees, while Ehud Barak hailed it as an achievement in an interview with Dan Margalit. In 2002, the organization, Justice for Jews from Arab Countries, was created and its founding Congress met in London in June 2008. Beginning in November 2008, they planned to undertake major initiatives and that in 2009, they would hold a national conference in Israel. Their achievement to date is described as having returned the issue of Jews from Arab countries to the agenda of the Middle East, hometown return. In November 2012, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas repeated his stance that the claim of return was not to his original hometown, but to a Palestinian state that would be established at the 1967 borderline. Hamas denounced this adjustment. Abbas later clarified that this was his own personal opinion and not a policy of giving up the right of return. Israeli politicians denounced the clarification. UN General Assembly Resolution 194. The issue of the right of return of Palestinian refugees has been a very sensitive issue for Palestinians since the creation of the refugee problem. As a result of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, the United Nations UN General Assembly Resolution 194, which was passed on December 11, 1948, recognized the right of return for the first time. Unlike Security Council resolutions under Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter, General Assembly resolutions have only a recommendatory character and are not binding under international law. Resolution 194 also deals with the situation in the region of Palestine at that time, establishing and defining the role of the United Nations Conciliation Commission as an organization to facilitate peace in the region. Article 11 Palestinian refugees. The main article of Resolution 1948, for the purpose of this article, is Article 11, which deals with the return of refugees. Article 11 of the resolution reads, resolves that the refugees wishing to return to their homes and live at peace with their neighbors should be permitted to do so at the earliest practicable date, and that compensation should be paid for the property of those choosing not to return and for loss of or damage to property which, under principles of international law or inequity, should be made good by the governments or authorities responsible. Interpretations. The exact meaning and timing of enforcement of the resolution were disputed from the beginning. Israel has always contested this reading, pointing out that the text merely states that the refugees should be permitted to return to their homes at the earliest practicable date, and this recommendation applies only to those wishing to live at peace with their neighbors. In particular, David Ben-Gurion, the first Prime Minister of Israel, insisted in an interview with the members of the Conciliations Commission that as long as Israel could not count on a dedication of any Arab refugees to remain at peace with their neighbors, a consequence, he contended, of the Arab states' unwillingness to remain at peace with the State of Israel, resettlement was not an obligation for his country.